We had some breaking news. An Israeli spokesperson has told Reuters that the Ayatollah is dead and his body has been found. This has not been confirmed by the Iranian regime, so we cannot say it 100%, but it does seem like it's a very distinct possibility that the supreme leader in Iran is dead. That being the case, obviously, the Ayatollah did not operate in isolation. There is a whole regime, a system in place that was behind him. So my question to you this hour is, what happens next? What do you think is going to happen now? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You can text 84850 or send a comment to LBC via your Alexa. In the meantime, while you're thinking about that question, we have Simon Marks on the line, who I believe has some breaking news from Washington for us. Simon, what can you tell us?
Well, Natasha, within the last few minutes, President Trump has given an interview by telephone to the website Axios here, and he has indicated that he is open to seeking off-ramps in terms of this military conflict with Iran. He has said in comments that I think further underscore the total absence of any comprehensive strategy guiding this military assault, that he can either extend the campaign for as long as is necessary and, as he puts it, take everything into my own hands, or he can wrap things up in 2 or 3 days and basically say to the Iranian government, I'll see you again next time you start developing your nuclear or long-range missile program. Now, what happens in all of that to the much-professed call on the Iranian people to rise up and seize the opportunity to form their own government and finally rid themselves of a regime that President Trump's own influencer on Capitol Hill, Senator Lindsey Graham, has again today compared to the Nazis and actually attacked the Prime Minister and other European leaders, accusing them of seeking to appease a regime that he equates with the Nazis, is very unclear. But there are indications here this afternoon that within hours of beginning this military assault on Iran, Donald Trump is already looking for a way to wrap it up. And that feeds into the notion that actually the outcome that he might be looking for in Iran is not dissimilar to the outcome of events in Venezuela after his January attack on Caracas that led, of course, to the overthrow of President Nicolas Maduro, his abduction, but then the United States keeping his regime in place and working with his own Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, in exchange for which, of course, she handed control of Venezuela's oil industry over to the US government. It is perfectly possible that that is the kind of outcome that Donald Trump may be looking for. I think we also have to ask whether, over the course of the last few hours, seeing the reaction to what has taken place in Iran and the evidence that the Iranians have the military capacity, at least over the short term, to broaden the conflict and attack their neighbors, many of whom are regional allies of the United States, whether the Trump administration isn't coming under intense pressure from those regional allies, who, of course, have said to Donald Trump for weeks, do not do this. If you do this, you have no way of conditioning the outcome of this military action, especially if you're not willing to put American boots on the ground, which is precisely where we find ourselves this evening. But astonishing comments to that website Axios by Donald Trump, indicating he's looking for an off-ramp and he might be willing to settle for a situation in which the current Iranian government in some fashion remains in power, just hours after indicating that this was all about regime change. Suddenly, it seems that perhaps it wasn't.
So not as deeply concerned with the plight of the Iranian people as perhaps he might have suggested, which will come as a shock to absolutely no one. Can I ask Simon, did he give this interview before or after the Israeli spokesperson confirmed to Reuters that the Ayatollah is dead?
I don't know the precise timing of that and the sequence of events, but there have obviously been rumours here for hours that the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was at least missing in action. And we'd heard several hours ago from Channel 12 in Israel, a television station supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu, that they believed that the Supreme Leader had been killed. Certainly, that was one goal of this military action, and we know that the Iranian President, Masoud Pezeshkian, was also targeted by the joint US-Israeli military attack. I do think it is worth underscoring that, never mind international law, and of course this completely contravenes international law, as everyone has been observing over the last few hours, and we've heard no justification for this action in terms of international law. It also, on the face of it, appears to break American law, because there is a law enacted by President Ronald Reagan in 1981 that prohibits any American president or other public official from engaging in the attempted assassination of a foreign head of government or other senior officials within foreign governments. And I think there's no doubt that what has seemingly taken place, the fate that appears to have befallen the Iranian Supreme Leader, while absolutely nobody, I think, here or in large parts of the world is going to be shedding any tears over his demise, given the deadly crackdown on protesters, thousands of whom got shot by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards just earlier this year. Given the long track record of international terrorism by the government, there will be few, certainly in the West, shedding tears over his demise. But on the face of it, that looks like not only an egregious breach of international law, but also a breach of American law as well.
Will there be any consequences for Trump if it is found that he's broken American law?
Well, there'll be no consequences in terms of anybody moving forward and saying you've broken American law and therefore you have to be brought to book over it. I mean, I think the political consequences of all of this must be in doubt, given the electoral calendar here. I mean, it's now almost March. We've got midterm elections in November, and up on Capitol Hill, you've got a lot of very nervous Republicans wondering if they're going to be returned to office when votes are cast in those midterm elections that will determine the balance of power in Congress. So the president is skating on thin ice, and he's got to keep those Republicans on side, and they will be wondering about the political consequences of backing to the hilt a military campaign that, again, is being run in the absence of any plan. Their president has not explained to the American people what the purpose is of this, what the cause of it is. I mean, this loose suggestion that there was an imminent threat to American national security just 7 months after the president told the country that he had completely obliterated Iran's nuclear program. In fact, if you go to the White House website, you can still find on it a news release by the president's press secretary saying that Iran's nuclear program was totally obliterated, and anybody suggesting otherwise is engaging in fake news. But now the administration itself says that there was an imminent threat to American national security because the Iranians had been rebuilding that nuclear program, or maybe perhaps those reports that we got last July were accurate and that it was never completely obliterated, and that the Iranians did in fact squirrel away some of their enriched uranium stockpiles before the US and Israeli military assault began. I do think it's worth underscoring, Natasha, he's not ruling out tonight here the prospect of an extended engagement by US forces in Iran, and earlier US officials, who of course have been huddled with him at Mar-a-Lago and here in Washington, his national security team, were saying that there could be days and days of this to come. But this is a significant shift in the president's narrative, already saying he's looking for an off-ramp, and potentially one that keeps the regime in place. And then he says, I'll see them again in a few years when they've tried to rebuild their nuclear and ballistic missile program again. That is a stunning change from a man who just hours ago was projecting himself as a hero of the Iranian people, the first American president who had the guts to do what needed to be done in order to give them the opportunity to take action to seize control of their own country's destiny.
So the United States and Israel have just launched a massive joint military operation against Iran. They're calling it Operation Epic Fury on the American side and Roaring Lion on the Israeli side. And Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran for the last 36 years, is dead. Iranian state media has confirmed it. His compound in Tehran was destroyed. Along with him, dozens of top military and intelligence officials have been killed, including the IRGC commander, Iran's defense minister, the secretary of the National Security Council, and multiple intelligence chiefs. The IDF claims they killed 40 top officials in a single minute. And as I'm recording this, the strikes are still ongoing. Israel has launched a new wave of strikes in what it's calling the heart of Tehran. This is the biggest military operation in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. So let's talk about it, not just what happened, but what it actually means and why you should be deeply concerned, regardless of how you feel about the Iranian regime. First, let's address the thing a lot of people are going to say. Good riddance. Khamenei was a brutal dictator. He oversaw the violent suppression of protesters, thousands of whom were shot dead by security forces earlier this year. His regime funded proxy militias across the region. He presided over a theocracy that oppressed women, executed dissidents, and crushed any form of political freedom for decades. All of that is true. And I'm not going to pretend that there are many people outside of Iran's loyal base who are mourning this man's death. In Los Angeles, the largest Iranian diaspora community in the world, people are celebrating in the streets carrying Iranian, American, and Israeli flags. Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince, called Khamenei a bloodthirsty despot who has been erased from the face of history. He's calling on Iran's military forces to abandon the regime and help transition the country to a free future. So yes, two things can be true at once. Khamenei was a terrible leader, and what just happened should terrify you. Let me explain why. Let's start with the justification, because it's already falling apart. Trump said this was about eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. But here's the problem. Just last week, at his State of the Union address, Trump was still claiming that he had completely obliterated Iran's nuclear program back in June 2025. It's literally still on the White House website. A press release from his own press secretary saying Iran's nuclear program was totally obliterated, and anyone suggesting otherwise is fake news. So which is it? Was it obliterated or wasn't it? Because you can't claim total victory 7 months ago and then launch the biggest military operation in a generation because actually the threat was imminent all along. Those two things cannot both be true. And nobody in the administration seems interested in explaining the contradiction. They just barrel forward and hope you don't notice. And it gets worse. Iran's foreign minister has publicly stated that negotiations were actively happening. On Thursday, 2 days before the strikes, Iranian negotiators were sitting across from Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in Geneva. The foreign minister says a deal was within reach, they were making progress, they had resolved some differences and were planning to continue. And then on Saturday morning, missiles started flying. He literally said he doesn't understand why they attacked while talks were progressing. Now, I'm not going to take Iran's foreign minister at face value, but the Omani mediators who facilitated the talks flew to Washington on Friday to brief US officials, apparently believing progress had been made. So we were bombing a country we were negotiating with 48 hours earlier. Think about what that means for American credibility in any future negotiation with anyone. Why would any country on earth trust American diplomacy after this? You show up to the table on Thursday and you drop bombs on Saturday. That's not foreign policy. That's a betrayal. Now here's where I need to talk about something that I think is going to define this entire conflict. A girls' elementary school in Minab, southern Iran, was struck during these operations. Reports indicate at least 148 people were killed. The school reportedly had around 170 students inside, girls between the ages of 7 and 12. It was hit at 10:45 in the morning as classes were changing periods. The school was reportedly located near an IRGC naval base that was also targeted. Iran says this was a deliberate strike. The US says it never targets civilians and is looking into the reports. The Washington Post has verified footage of the destroyed school but says the death toll hasn't been independently confirmed. Now, I cannot tell you for certain what happened here. What I can tell you is that when you launch hundreds of missiles and bombs across a populated country, civilians die. That is not a controversial statement. That is a physical certainty. And when one of the places where civilians die is an elementary school full of little girls, the phrase collateral damage starts to sound a lot less clinical and a lot more monstrous. You cannot simultaneously tell the Iranian people that you're liberating them while their children are being pulled from rubble. That math doesn't work. It has never worked anywhere it's been tried. And if you remember the call we covered recently on this channel, where James O'Brien asked a caller whether Israel would accept this kind of collateral damage if it were happening to their own people, well, I think we're watching the answer play out in real time. And speaking of things that don't work, let's talk about Trump's strategy here, if you can call it that, because the narrative has shifted 3 times in less than 24 hours. First, it was regime change. Trump releases a video telling Iranians to take over your government when the bombing stops. This is probably your only chance for generations. Netanyahu echoes the same thing, saying the goal is to remove the Ayatollah's regime from power. Big, bold, historic language. Then, hours later, Trump gives an interview to Axios where he's already floating off-ramps. He says he could wrap this up in 2 or 3 days and just tell Iran, see you again in a few years if you start rebuilding. That is a staggeringly different message from regime change. And then by Sunday, he's telling The Atlantic that Iran wants to talk, and he's agreed to talk. In the span of roughly 36 hours, we've gone from take over your government, this is your only chance, to they want to talk and I've agreed to talk. I mean, what are we doing here? Is this regime change or is this a conversation? Because you can't have both. You can't assassinate a country's supreme leader and then ring them up the next day asking if they fancy a chat. The Venezuela comparison is important and nobody is talking about it enough. Remember what happened in January? The US essentially carried out a regime change operation, captured Maduro, brought him to New York, but then kept his vice president in power in exchange for control of Venezuela's oil industry. There are people in Washington who think that's the playbook here too. Decapitate the leadership, watch the power structure scramble, then cut a deal with whoever's left, standing in exchange for strategic concessions. The problem is Iran is not Venezuela. Iran has 90 million people, a massive military apparatus, proxy networks across the entire region. And unlike Maduro, the Iranian regime has millions of genuine ideological supporters. Iran's foreign minister made that point explicitly. He said you cannot do regime change while millions of people support the regime. Ali Larijani, Iran's top security official, has already announced a temporary leadership council and warned that any secessionist groups will face a harsh response. This regime is not collapsing, it's digging in. The IRGC has announced what it calls its most intense offensive operation in the history of Iran's armed forces. Whether that's bluster or not, it tells you something about the mood in Tehran. And that brings me to the regional fallout, which is catastrophic. Iran has launched retaliatory strikes against Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. 9 people killed in an Israeli town. Air hubs damaged across the Gulf. Dubai, which should be in the middle of peak tourist season, is a ghost town. Highways empty, beaches deserted. Schools across the UAE switched to remote learning. Qatar has been hit with multiple waves of missile attacks. Protesters stormed the US consulate in Karachi, Pakistan, and at least 9 people were killed. 3 US soldiers are dead and 5 seriously wounded. The entire Middle East is on fire, and it's been less than 48 hours. And remember, US Arab allies warned Trump not to do this. They told him explicitly that if he did this, he would have no way of controlling the outcome, especially without boots on the ground. And now missiles are landing on their airports and their people are dying too. I also want to point out something that the LBC segment we used as our source material touched on, which is the legality of all of this. Because there's a Reagan-era executive order from 1981 that explicitly prohibits any American president from engaging in the assassination of a foreign head of state. Now, the US will argue it was Israel that carried out the strike on Khamenei's compound, but this was a joint operation. It was planned together for thousands of hours, according to Israeli military officials. The intelligence was shared, the coordination was total. You don't get to plan something jointly, execute it jointly, name your half of it Operation Epic Fury, and then say actually the assassination part was them, not us. That's not how this works. And on top of American law, there's the obvious question of international law, which this operation appears to flagrantly violate. But as we've seen over and over, international law only seems to apply to countries that can't fight back. But here's what really bothers me, and I'll leave you with this. Trump ran as the peace candidate. His team explicitly warned voters that Kamala Harris would lead America into wars. Stephen Miller posted about Liz Cheney being a warmonger. Trump himself in 2016 said, "We must abandon the failed policy of nation building and regime change." He called out Bush for Iraq. He called out the disaster of Afghanistan. He literally posted in 2013 that Obama would attack Iran to show how tough he is, and in 2011 that Obama would start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. Well, Obama negotiated a deal and never attacked Iran. Trump has now attacked Iran twice in 8 months, including after his own negotiations collapsed, and is openly calling for regime change while simultaneously looking for off-ramps because he clearly has no plan for what comes next. Pete Hegseth, his own defense secretary, said after the June strikes that this mission was not and has not been about regime change. That was 8 months ago. Now it explicitly is. What changed? Nobody will say. And the people cheering this on, and I understand why Iranian diaspora communities are celebrating the death of their oppressor, I genuinely get that, but the people in Washington and on social media cheering this on need to ask themselves one question. What is the end game? Because if the end game is regime change, you need 1 million boots on the ground, according to some estimates, and we've seen how that movie ends in Iraq and Afghanistan. If the end game is a deal, you just bombed the people you were negotiating with and killed their leader. If the end game is see you in a few years, congratulations, you've just created a martyred supreme leader, radicalized millions of people across the Muslim world, destabilized the entire Gulf region, got American soldiers killed, and you're right back where you started in 3 years, except everyone hates you more. There are 148 dead girls in Minab who would like to know what the plan is, and right now, nobody in Washington seems to have an answer.